That's Rod Serling introducing an episode of The Twilight Zone more than half a century ago. Starting tomorrow, the show is back in an all-new series on CBS All Access.
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Hidden for over half a century, too dangerous for TV, now unleashed. What could make an episode of The Twilight Zone, a show famous for unsettling truths, so controversial that it was banned for 55 years? Was it too real? Too raw? Or did it expose a side of America no one wanted to face? Imagine an episode so haunting it vanished after a single broadcast. And now, it's back. Why now? Why this story? And what does it say about us today? In this video, we'll uncover the lost tale that TV tried to erase, The Encounter. You'll hear insider details, censorship secrets, and why this once-buried episode matters now more than ever. The Twilight Zone's bold gamble. When The Twilight Zone first aired on October 2, 1959, it didn't just challenge what television could be, it shattered the mold. While most shows played it safe with light-hearted sitcoms or predictable dramas, The Twilight Zone dared to ask the questions that kept Americans awake at night. At its core was Rod Serling, a World War II veteran who had seen humanity at its worst and wasn't interested in sugarcoating reality. Instead, he used speculative fiction, aliens, time travel, dystopias, as camouflage for stories about racism, war, paranoia, and the human capacity for cruelty. It was a gamble, and for a time, it worked.
I used an MGM backlot with existing sets that were already there, and it looked like a movie.
Serling was no stranger to censorship battles long before The Twilight Zone. In the mid-1950s, he was a rising star of live television drama. His script, Noon on Doomsday, inspired by the slaying of Emmett Till, was gutted by nervous network executives. They erased any mention of race, changed the setting, and watered down the message. Serling was furious, but he learned. If he wanted to tell hard truths, he'd have to outsmart the censors. With The Twilight Zone, he finally had a stage where he could hide razor-sharp critiques inside science fiction and fantasy. He didn't write about a lynching. He wrote about an alien invasion that mirrored mob violence. He didn't criticize McCarthyism directly. He created stories of mind-controlling children and authoritarian regimes on distant planets. Week after week, The Twilight Zone walked a razor-thin line. Sponsors wanted ratings and no controversy. Networks wanted stories that wouldn't trigger letters of complaint or risk advertisers pulling out. Serling's brilliance was in finding that space where truth could sneak through. He made the strange familiar and the familiar strange, forcing viewers to see their world differently without even realizing it, until the credits rolled. But it wasn't easy. Network censors still pushed back when Serling's allegories cut too close to real issues. Sponsors fretted over episodes that hinted at racism, class conflict, or America's moral failings. And while The Twilight Zone earned critical acclaim and a devoted following, it never became a ratings juggernaut. The show's budget shrank, pressure mounted. Serling, exhausted by the constant negotiations and compromises, knew his time was running out. Then came The Encounter. This wasn't a story about Martians or time travelers. There were no parallel universes or sentient robots. It was two men, locked in a room, forced to face their shared history of violence, guilt, and inherited trauma. It was The Twilight Zone's boldest gamble yet, and the one that would finally go too far. Little did Serling know this quiet, claustrophobic episode would be the one that crossed an invisible line. Not because it failed to disguise its message, but because it dared to speak too plainly. The attic where The Encounter unfolds wasn't just a set. It was a pressure cooker for the country's buried fears and unspoken guilt. And when the episode aired, the backlash came swift and fierce. And that's where the true controversy begins. The moment when one episode became too dangerous for America to see. The Encounter, TV's forbidden tale.
The episode is marked by a young George Takei in one of his first starring roles and was ultimately pulled after airing only once on CBS in 1964 because of its racial overtones. In particular, a non-factual plot point about the attack on Pearl Harbor.
On May 1st, 1964, The Twilight Zone aired an episode that would vanish almost as quickly as it appeared. The encounter was unlike anything the series had done before. There were no special effects, no elaborate sets, no fantastical monsters. Instead, viewers were invited into the cramped, dusty attic of a World War II veteran and into the darkest corners of America's conscience. For 25 minutes, two men, one white, one Japanese American, confronted ghosts far more terrifying than any alien invasion. By the end of the broadcast, it was clear. This wasn't just a story. It was a provocation. And CBS wasn't ready for the storm it unleashed. The setup was deceptively simple. Neville Brand played Fenton, a bitter, haunted World War II veteran. George Takei, long before Star Trek made him famous, played Arthur, a polite, soft-spoken Japanese-American man looking for work. The entire episode takes place in Fenton's attic, an attic cluttered with forgotten relics of war, including one object that will ignite the story's slow-burn tension: a samurai sword looted from a Japanese soldier Fenton had slain. What begins as an awkward conversation over beers spirals into a psychological duel. Fenton's casual bigotry bubbles to the surface. He brags about his war trophies and hints at violence committed in the name of duty. Arthur tries to deflect, but the sword draws his attention like a magnet. Then comes the twist that shattered the illusion of simple drama. Arthur reveals that his real name is Taro, and that his father was a spy who helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor.
He signaled the planes. He showed them where to drop the bombs. My old man was a traitor.
In that moment, the attic becomes a battlefield. Fenton's guilt and paranoia boil over. Arthur's confession, whether true or a desperate invention, transforms him in Fenton's eyes from neighbor to enemy. The samurai sword, silent, gleaming, seems almost to demand blood. The episode ends in violence, with neither man emerging as a hero, both consumed by the legacy of hatred and war. There is no moral clarity. No easy resolution, just two broken souls trapped in the wreckage of history. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Viewers flooded CBS with complaints. Asian American organizations condemned the portrayal of a Japanese American family as traitors, at a time when the wounds of internment were still fresh and largely unacknowledged by the US government. Sponsors threatened to pull their support. Even defenders of the show admitted the episode had touched a raw nerve that 1960s America wasn't prepared to face. CBS acted swiftly and quietly. The encounter was pulled from syndication. It was left out of rerun packages, home video releases, and eventually streaming lineups. For decades, it became a ghost episode, whispered about by fans, copied on grainy bootleg tapes, but never officially seen again. George Takei rarely spoke of it, perhaps because the role cut too close to his own painful history. What made the encounter so dangerous wasn't just its subject. It was its refusal to offer comfort. The episode didn't tell viewers who to blame or how to feel. It held up a mirror, and what stared back was the face of a nation unwilling to confront its own sins. But why does that mirror still matter today? Why, after all these years, does the encounter strike a nerve as sharp as ever? That's where the story takes an even darker, more urgent turn. Why the encounter still haunts us. More than 5 decades have passed since the encounter first aired, but the questions it raised are far from settled. If anything, the episode feels more urgent today than it did in 1964. Back then, CBS may have believed that pulling the story from syndication would help the nation avoid discomfort. But trauma, guilt, and injustice don't disappear just because a network buries them. And now that the encounter has resurfaced, its message hits like a warning we can't ignore. Consider George Takei's own story. As a child, he lived through the very nightmare that the encounter circles. At just 5 years old, He and his family were torn from their home by government order and sent to an internment camp in Arkansas. They had committed no crime. There was no trial, no defense. Their only offense, being Japanese American in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. Take has spoken movingly about the humiliation of living behind barbed wire, watched by armed guards, treated as an enemy in the country of his birth. And yet, in the encounter, his character, Arthur, doesn't rage against that injustice. Instead, he does something far more complicated. He confesses, or seems to confess, to inherited guilt. His father, he claims, was a spy for Imperial Japan. Was Arthur telling the truth? Or was his confession a twisted expression of internalized shame, of a lifetime spent trying to explain the unexplainable? The encounter refuses to answer, and that refusal is its power. Arthur isn't just a symbol of innocence wronged. He's a man warped by the weight of history, just as Fenton, the white veteran, is warped by his own guilt and hatred. And that's why the attic in the encounter feels less like a room and more like a national purgatory. Fenton and Arthur are trapped in a cycle of blame, fear, and violence. The sword, whether haunted or not, becomes a symbol of what we inherit from past wars. Not just objects, but wounds, resentments, and lies. Neither man can escape, and neither, it seems, can we. Fast forward to today, and the episode's relevance is chilling. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States saw a surge in anti-Asian hate crimes. Citizens, often born and raised in America, were spat on, beaten, or worse, accused of being part of some foreign threat simply because of how they looked. The same poisonous logic that fed internment camps in World War II resurfaced in new forms. And like Fenton and Arthur, our society found itself trapped, unable or unwilling to break free from the cycle of suspicion and scapegoating. This is why the encounter matters now. It dramatizes not just a historic injustice, but a recurring national sickness. The attic, the sword, the bitter dialogue, they remind us that the past is never past. The unspoken wounds of one generation become the open sores of the next. Rod Serling understood that trauma isn't something you can erase with a network memo or a programming change. It lingers, mutates, and reemerges, especially when we refuse to face it. But the encounter wasn't the only story that television tried to bury. There were other episodes that vanished not because they failed, but because they dared to ask the wrong questions at the wrong time. And those lost stories reveal even more about the long shadow of censorship. Other lost Twilight Zone episodes. The encounter might be the most famous banned episode of the Twilight Zone, but it wasn't alone. Over the years, several episodes vanished from syndication, not because they were poorly made or forgettable, but because they fell afoul of legal battles, nervous sponsors, or cultural taboos. Together, these lost stories tell a larger tale, one about who controls our memory and how easy it is for powerful institutions to decide what stories get to survive. Consider Miniature, an eerie 1963 episode starring a young Robert Duvall. The plot was as haunting as it was delicate. A lonely, socially awkward man becomes obsessed with a dollhouse at a museum, convinced that the figures inside are alive. It's a portrait of isolation, of someone retreating into fantasy because reality has failed him. The episode struck a chord, but then it vanished. Not because of complaints or controversy, but due to a tangle of legal rights. The estate of writer Charles Beaumont, who crafted the story, claimed CBS hadn't secured the proper long-term permissions. As a result, Miniature was pulled from reruns for decades. It wasn't until the 2000s, with legal disputes resolved, that the episode re-emerged on DVD sets, a quiet reminder of how even red tape can bury art. Then there was A Short Drink from a Certain Fountain, which aired in late 1963. In it, an aging man desperate to please his much younger wife takes a youth serum, with disastrous consequences. The serum works too well, turning him into a child and leaving his wife horrified. The premise was pure Twilight Zone, darkly comic, morally ambiguous, and unsettling. But soon after its broadcast, the episode was yanked from syndication. The reason? A murky legal threat. Reports suggest that the plot closely resembled an unproduced script from another writer, who may have threatened to sue. Rather than face a lawsuit, CBS quietly shelved the episode, and with it, a fable about vanity, regret, and unintended consequences. Sounds and silences followed a different path to disappearance. This 1964 episode told of a man obsessed with loud noises who finds himself cursed to hear every sound at unbearable volume. What was meant as a surreal meditation on obsession and mental breakdown became, unexpectedly, the target of a lawsuit. A Navy veteran claimed the episode defamed him, arguing that it mirrored his life without permission. Once again, CBS's solution was silence. The episode was pulled from circulation, leaving viewers to forget it ever existed. And finally, there was an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, unique among Twilight Zone episodes because it wasn't written by Rod Serling or his team at all. Instead, it was a French short film, adapted from Ambrose Bierce's famous story about a Confederate sympathizer who imagines escaping his execution in the final moments before death. CBS aired it once in 1964 as part of the series. The haunting, wordless tale won critical acclaim. But licensing agreements allowed for only a single broadcast. After that, it faded from the public eye, absent from marathons, reruns, and most memories. What ties these lost episodes together is more than coincidence. Each one represents a moment when art collided with the limits of what networks, sponsors, or society were willing to tolerate. And yet, in trying to bury these stories, the censors revealed just how powerful they really were. Which brings us to the larger legacy of Rod Serling's creation, and the uncomfortable truths that the Twilight Zone dares us to face, even today. The legacy of uncomfortable truths.
This desperately required 8-inch little men to walk across the floor of a room, and suddenly we are made aware of the fact that this woman who we thought was normal is actually an extraterrestrial giant, and the two men who are the invaders are actually really young.
Rod Serling once said that in television, his job had become the art of self-censorship. It wasn't a boast, it was a lament. Serling was a writer who wanted to challenge, unsettle, and expose. But who knew that at every turn the forces of commerce and fear would try to stop him? With the Twilight Zone, he found a way to speak through masks, monsters, space missions, time loops. The strange became his disguise for the deeply familiar, our prejudices, our paranoia, our capacity for cruelty. But even Serling's skill couldn't always protect the truths he wanted to tell. The encounter proved that. So did the other lost episodes. These weren't just stories that got cut because they were bad. They were stories that got cut because they made people squirm. Because they asked questions that didn't have easy answers. Because they dared to leave audiences in the gray zone, where there are no clear heroes, no clear villains, only flawed people trying and failing to make sense of a broken world. And that, in the end, is the Twilight Zone's greatest legacy. Its insistence that art's job isn't to comfort, but to confront. It's no coincidence that modern shows like Black Mirror, Severance, or The Leftovers all owe a debt to Serling's vision. They too take what's familiar, our devices, our jobs, our families, and twist them just enough to reveal the cracks beneath the surface. Where Serling asked, "What if the real monster is us?" These successors keep pushing the question, what if the systems we built to protect us are the ones destroying us? The return of the encounter, after 55 years, is more than a curious bit of TV trivia. It's a sign that audiences today may finally be ready to sit with the discomfort that 1964 tried to avoid. We live in a world still haunted by the same ghosts that filled that attic. Racial trauma, generational guilt, national shame. The difference is that now, more viewers recognize those ghosts and see the value in hearing their stories. It's also no accident that the Twilight Zone continues to inspire new work. The 2019 revival, hosted by Jordan Peele, sought to update Serling's moral provocations for a new age. While the results were mixed, the intent was clear. The world still needs stories that disturb our certainty, that ask us to reconsider what we believe about ourselves and each other. Upcoming projects, like Dan Waters' Twilight Zone comic series or the new feature film in development, promise to keep that spirit alive. But the truth is, the Twilight Zone never really left. Every time a story forces us to question our assumptions, every time a piece of art refuses to tie up its moral threads in a neat bow, we're stepping into that same dimension, the one Serling mapped out more than 60 years ago. And if there's one lesson that the encounter teaches us, it's this. The most dangerous stories aren't the ones with monsters. They're the ones that show us our own reflection and dare us to keep looking. If you were captivated by this forgotten chapter of TV history, like, comment, and subscribe for more hidden truths and pop culture deep dives. Click the next video for more secrets from the golden age of television.